Hello everyone, Dan at Electrum Charging Solutions, here with the industry expert. I know I keep saying that, Tony, but it is what it is. Tony Giaventu, Executive Director, Condominium Homeowners Association. And this is our final segment, sadly, because...
Well, for this group, this is the final segment.
Yeah.
Technology will change and we'll be back, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will, but it's been super informative, and we're going to wrap this one up with I think, the topic that, well, they're all hot topics, but this is a big one too, which is cost, recuperating costs. How do we charge owners,
right.
or sorry, how do we charge EV owners when they're using the station, and so on and so on. But we'll get to the questions here, and let's see what happens. So first one, I think is pretty important because, as previously mentioned, costs are one of, or probably the most important thing whenever you're doing something in a building, anywhere for that matter. So are there any grants available today?
There are always grants available. They're always changing. It's kind of like an ice flow going down a river. You just watch it change it in and out and stuff like that. Yeah. But they're always changing. Go to CleanBC, go to your local municipalities, go to BC Hydro, and make inquiries constantly. And grants come with different incentives, different conditions, and that will always be changing on a rapid pace. So yeah, the answer is yes, but they're in multiple places. But don't be afraid to contact your local government either.
Yeah, absolutely.
A number of the municipalities have actually provided incentive grants in a really great level for charging stations to be installed. Cool.
I guess the message here, you've got to be creative and proactive and get online.
Well, and talk to the consultants you're working with, because the consultants will probably be as tuned in as anyone is about what grants are the most current and what's most happening.
Excellent. So next question, can the cost of the installation be recuperated by the Strata Council?
Yes, anytime an owner wants to make an alteration to a strata lot, common property, limited common property, if the alteration requires the approval of the Strata Corporation, so putting a charging station into a common, limited common property parking space, anytime you want to do something that is an alteration of common property, in exchange for the alteration, the Strata Corporation can require that you pay all the costs, that you enter into an agreement that you'll be responsible for all costs relating to current and future liabilities that may arise. And the other thing you want to think about in that agreement is what happens if the owner sells and there's a subsequent owner who uses that spot who isn't using an electric vehicle charging station, right? And because you could end up with a dormant facility left in the event of that. And that may be, you may actually have some sort of financial solution condition at the end of your agreement that says, in the event that the subsequent owner does not participate with the EVSE and pay for those services, the seller must pay out the balance of the cost for it, right? And so a Strata Corporation does not need to feel the least bit concerned that the rest of the owners are going to be burdening this cost. And that's just for the setup of the whole thing. That will also include any legal costs. I recommend Strata Council, go to your lawyer, get them to draw up the agreement, think of all of the terms and conditions of the agreement. The person who wants the station should be paying for those things as well. And that solves that side. The other side is who then pays for the electricity and the operation.
That was my next question.
Yeah. So the $1 million question. Well, my first answer, I think, which seems to be accelerating as technology changes, is smart meters are the best solution, because they can be tied into existing meters on the building. And so your charging station with your smart meter is tied into your meter for your unit. It automatically goes onto your electric bill. Nobody has to administer this. There's no service charges on top of it. It's easier to monitor. There's much better assessment. If that's possible, that's probably the best option. If it isn't possible, and maybe you have 4 stations, if you have a chargeback facility that people can use that works, or maybe it runs on a cost per hour. Every hour you're plugged in, you get charged this amount. Whether your vehicle's charging or not makes no difference. You're getting card charge cost per hour. Those get put into either rules or bylaws of the corporation, and the fee is there. There is a question, can you meter with respects to a parking space? You can set the rate within the rule or the bylaw, provided it's common or limited common property. You cannot meter for strata lots.
Excellent. Is it legal for strata councils to charge for power?
Well, it is, because the legislation was very specifically amended, the regulations last year, and thanks to the government for doing that, which enables strata corporations to specifically charge for two parts. The cost for power that is consumed within their corporation. They're not acting as a commercial service provider. They are basically charging their own owner for the utility that they're using. And they can also add a reasonable cost of recovery for the infrastructure that's being installed, maintained, and repaired. So, you might not recover all the infrastructure costs today, but you might recover it over the next 5 years.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about the metering side, and then of course there's the network charger side. In the event, or in a situation where we don't have the ability to be able to utilize that meter, and it's, and Hydro's charging that user directly.
Right.
The network solution, having a network manage that for the Strata Council. We know that in a lot of situations, Strata Councils don't want to be burdened with any administrative duties or work around or managing this type of stuff. So in your view, does the network charger, is it a good solution in the fact that it administers, collects money and deposits it into the Strata's account?
It can be, but it's going to be more complicated from a business perspective for the Strata Corporation, right?
Okay.
This is one of the variables that probably will need the approval of the owners at a general meeting.
Okay.
Right? Because you now have a different business administration relationship.
Okay.
The other side of that is, if it's administered by someone else and you're using a sub-metering system, is it the Strata Corporation now who's administering it, or someone else, and that could trigger some other technicalities.
Gotcha.
So I think you would want to look at the business relationship closely. But my recommendation is to rely on the consultants that you're working with and get their best recommendation for the system that they think might work the ideal for your Strata Corporation. For a Strata Corporation with 2 charging stations, and they've set up a rule where, Bob and Joan who have it, they're each paying $40 a month for the facility. You can just come up with a flat rate. You can take an estimate, assess what the value you think is going to be, whatever you think it's going to be, that's what you come up with on a monthly basis. That's in the rule. It's very simple to do. And the nice thing about the rule is it's quid pro quo. If Bob or Janet doesn't pay for their electrical, you can terminate their electrical, because it's a common facility.
Absolutely.
It's not you cannot do that to a Strata lot, right? So you do have leverage. They will pay, because they'll lose their facility if they don't pay.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about larger scale deployments, Tony was talking about maybe 2 or 3 or 4 chargers. With this 100% policy now, we're seeing some significant, we will be seeing some significant.
Well, if you have 120 chargers,
then
somebody's going to have to administer this.
That's right.
Because the Strata Council is not going to be collecting these and managing and monitoring them every month, and it needs to be on some sort of smart system that can easily be modulated into a program. So, you certainly will want a service provider managing that for you.
Okay. How do Strata Councils ensure that the right user is being billed for consuming power at that station?
Well, it's almost like the other side of the question is, how does Strata Councils make sure that the right person is parking in the right parking space too, right?
Absolutely.
So that's going to be technology for starters, right? So
access control.
Access control is the big issue, and the other part is, if you have a smart meter system, that will solve that problem. But it also takes the requirement of Strata Councils to administer their rules and their bylaws and enforce their rules and bylaws. And if you have violators who are poaching other people's power, there are significant fines within the legislation. Up to $200 per violation. So.
That's a lot of vehicle charging.
No one's getting away with free power if you're going to get fined for parking in someone's space and stealing their power.
It's the number one question we get asked when we're on site, and 1A, 1B is who's going to pay for the power, and there's always a misconception that we're talking about a huge dollar value here. We aren't really. So that leads into the next question, which is charging infrastructure in a Strata managed facility, is it a viable revenue stream?
Well, it's not intended to be a revenue stream. It's intended, for starters, to be economic and environmental, right? And if you look at the legislation says the reasonable cost.
Okay.
So the reasonable cost of the electrical service and the reasonable cost of recovery for the infrastructure. So that test may have to be applied in the courts or in the tribunal to determine what's reasonable. But you know, charging you $500 a month to charge your car is not reasonable.
We're talking about potentially the installation, the supply of the units, any network services or network fees that you may be paying, the consumption of power, that type of thing.
And when you layer all that over, it is much more reasonable than combustible and fuel-based vehicles anyhow.
Absolutely.
So, you know, but again, it has to be a reasonable cost. I always laugh at the Strata communities that like to test the boundaries of what reasonable looks like. So,
I think everybody tests the boundaries of what reasonable looks like. So next topic, submetering.
Yeah, so submetering. Well, you know, that's where I would look to the technology providers to see what there really is. You know, submetering on common property really is going to go into your bylaw or rule that deals with user fees. You can't submeter in strata lots because any service provided to a strata lot that's part of the common expenses is just based on unit entitlement. But if I have an exclusive user fee based on a rule or a bylaw, you know, only 5 of us are getting our vehicles charged, we pay for that. How we get that, it's either a rate, so a submetering will be a rate, you know, 15 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever it is, or 20 cents, whatever is a reasonable amount, then you're going to have to submeter to be able to determine how to feed that rate. So it is possible. And then smart metering, of course, the $1 million question is it submetering or not? But it really isn't if you think about the fact that it is actually still connected to the principal meter. So the charge is going back to its principal meter. So it's just simply a way of evaluating the capacity of energy that's being used at the space, not the value of energy at the space. That's determined through the main meter. So, you know, I think there's, and again, you know, the BC Utilities Commission are struggling with the whole issue on electric vehicles and the charging station, and you know, they've been running a great inquiry and commission, and the solutions will come out. You know, go back to the other video we did, age-old problem. Legislation usually 10 to 15 years behind technology.
It does, unfortunately, it moves at its own pace.
Well, it does, and justifiably so. A single word can have a dynamic change on a piece of legislation, but and technology moves so fast. There's no way anyone would be able to keep up with it anyhow.
We're in it every day, and it's a challenge. I mean, it's changing so quickly. The last question, sadly, what as a takeaway, what would you advise in terms of what strata councils should be doing when considering electric vehicle charging in their facility?
Any type of innovation update, and this is not just electric vehicle charging, there's all kinds of energy upgrades people can be doing to their buildings that have some real savings to them, and they need to look at it. Try to identify somebody on your strata council or within your community who can be a champion, who can spend the time and is willing to spend the time to gather all the documents and the information so that you can, from a base of knowledge, responsibly address these issues. Once you gather all of the documents and you have the knowledge and understand how your property is designated, how the change would take place, do we have to go to our owners for a vote or not? Who's going to pay for the electrical? What happens in the future? Once you know the answer or know how to answer those questions, this whole transition to putting in charging stations is very easy.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
But that knowledge gives you an incredible amount of power over the circumstance. It eliminates confusion. You know, we could sit at a strata council meeting month after month after month and debate this with absolutely no progress until we have all of the documents of our corporation. And if you have one person in your community who can be a champion, that's the best thing you can possibly ask for, because they'll be proactive, they'll talk to consultants, they're going to gather information, they'll get your records documents together, they'll talk to your owners. You know, and if you have a chance, when you're talking about technologies and energy and environment, have an information meeting with your owners too. Don't wait for your AGM for people to be fighting about this. You know, have an information meeting, talk about it, get a sense from your owners. You know, what's a good time of year of people thinking that they might like to get electric vehicles? How many of you would like to do this? You know, maybe it wasn't just 2 people, maybe it's actually 20 out of 60 people are thinking, you know, when the life cycle of my vehicle goes, I'd like an electric vehicle. You know, start thinking for the future here.
Absolutely. Well, that's a wrap.
That's
Tony,
excellent. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
My pleasure, for sure.
Thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed this. I think there's a lot of information through these 3 segments. We'll post them independently, of course. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, any questions, concerns, comments, put them below. And of course, there's the CHOA website, there's the Electrum website, tons of really good information, and really enjoyed this. Don't forget to subscribe.
And if you have a question, contact our office.
Yep.
Our staff will be more than happy to help you out.
Perfect.